It's my pleasure to be here with all of you this morning. As a nurse working in the skilled nursing arena and long-term care, I've cared for a lot of individuals who've had dementia and provided some care and support to their family members. But this is not my usual audience. My usual audience is that of staff members. I'm board certified in nursing professional development, so I'm often speaking to RNs and LPNs and nursing assistants and staff members in the skilled nursing center about how best to care for folks who have Alzheimer's disease, how best to communicate with them, how best to interact with them. And so I feel very privileged to be here with all of you today talking about the care needs of a person who has Alzheimer's disease, along with the needs of you as the caregiver, and how best to balance those needs, how to identify when you might be becoming unbalanced in those needs, and what you might be able to do to restore some little bits of balance along the way. So I thought it would be a good place to start with what is balance, right? So the dictionary defines balance as a state of equilibrium, or being in harmonious or proper arrangement or adjustment or proportion, or otherwise being evenly distributed. So this ancient Chinese philosophical symbol is known as the yin and the yang. And some believe that it represents darkness and light, or good and evil, male and female, fire and water, but opposites that are somehow in balance with one another. You'll notice that each teardrop-shaped color extends into the opposite color. They are interconnected and interdependent, and each color contains the essence of the opposite color. So the white teardrop contains the black color circle in the middle, and the black teardrop contains the white circle. And so they each contain the essence of the other in achieving that balance. So I think that's a really great symbol of what balance is. And today we'll discuss ways to try to find this balance or achieve or maintain this balance given the chaos, the unbalance, the certain changes and progression that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. So let's talk about the first time that you might have been thrown a little off balance, if you weren't already, and that might have been when the diagnosis was first officially made. And so a lot of times the diagnosis is really just a formality. Most of you knew something was going on already. Most of you might have identified a little bit of confusion or some memory loss or some difficulty processing information, but maybe had not yet fully acknowledged it or a little bit timid to name it, because sometimes something is a little bit more real when we name it. But ultimately the diagnosis was made for most of you or for someone that you know or relate to. And so at that time, as the caregiver, you might have been feeling a little bit of denial. Julian talked about denial, and denial is something we see so commonly among caregivers, among family members, and it can range from, it couldn't be, to full-blown, really just not accepting it, even though time is marching on, and even though there's so much that's visible in terms of the Alzheimer's disease itself. But certainly some denial is very common along the way, along with fear. What does this mean? What does the future hold? How is this going to change our lives? That whole piece of uncertainty that comes along with it, often leading to sadness or even progressing into depression over the situation and what's going on. Maybe feeling as though there's an undue burden placed upon you as a caregiver, wondering what all is going to be asked of you, what responsibilities you're going to have, how are you going to handle this. A sense of loss, a loss in terms of this loved one of yours who has Alzheimer's disease, but also loss in terms of maybe the life you've been living, the lifestyle you've been living, the independence you've had as a family or as the individual in your life. And certainly all of that can cause anxiety for you. And so those are some very common feelings that folks will have at the time that the disease is really diagnosed or becomes sort of defined in their lives. The individual who has the dementia, and you'll see the PWD abbreviation as we go forward, meaning the person with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, is feeling many of the same things: denial, perhaps fearfulness. They're feeling uncertain about their future as well. They are sad and or depressed. They are feeling feeling dependent upon the other person and feeling as though they are the burden placed on the other person. And they too are feeling a sense of loss in terms of their individuality, their ability to function, their personhood, who they are, their level of independence. And so while each of you have some pretty similar feelings, you'll notice those lists are nearly identical. You're each experiencing this from a very different perspective as the caregiver versus the person who's diagnosed with the disease. And so all of that may indeed throw you off balance. And as the caregiver, if you find that you are continuing to deny the presence of the disease or the progression of the disease or the amount of care that's needed, those kinds of things, it might really indicate that you're a little bit out of balance. If you find that you make excuses for your loved one's shortcomings, forgetfulness, those kinds of things, you might also be off balance, if you will. If you're pretending that things are normal, despite how unusual, Joanne told that story of walking around the neighborhood with her husband in his plaid and his Hawaiian and his fireman's hat. But she was not pretending that things were normal in doing that. She was really having a great approach to caring for someone with Alzheimer's. So if this kind of denial and failure to acknowledge and failure to really be part of what's going on in those kinds of ways continue, it really becomes very unhealthy. It really is very stressful and frustrating as the caregiver. And then it's also very confusing for the person who has the dementia. And so our goal is to restore some of that balance. So how do we find the balance? Well, some medical treatments will help delay the progression, delay some of those initial symptoms that an individual has. So some of those early medications will be very helpful to help you sort of steady yourself and find your balance. All of the support services that are out there, whether it's immediate family, whether it's friends who are willing to be supportive, whether it's community support, and I won't spend a lot of time on that because we have so many exhibitors here today who are able to really give you the detail on some of those support services that are in place. But I think that one of the things that we want to remember is that sometimes it's the person who has the dementia who's not getting quite as much support. As that person becomes a little bit less communicative, a little bit less engaged with others, they may be not as much part of the conversation and part of the support services, not necessarily including them or supporting them directly in those kinds of ways. So all of those feelings that we saw on the previous slide that individual with dementia is experiencing, if those are not met, those are not addressed, we're not giving them some way to talk about those or to know that we are recognizing that they must be going through a lot of different emotions, then sometimes those feelings will sort of rear their ugly head a little bit later on in terms of behaviors and other kinds of things. Another way to find some balance or restore some balance along the way is by planning ahead. And we talk about this as conversations before the crisis, meaning that before the disease progresses, before there's an imminent health care crisis, it's really important to think about what kind of care, what kind of services, and what kind of interventions the person with dementia would want to have at the end of life. And it's best to have those conversations when he or she can still express their wishes. It's hard to think about, it's even harder to discuss, but that planning ahead is so important. And as Dr. Summers said this morning, we're all going to pass on from this world someday. And, if you could plan your own final days, what would you want them to be like? We put so much planning into other milestone events in our lives, weddings, graduations, First Communion, bar mitzvahs, you name it, and we plan these elaborate events and celebrations and gatherings and food and all of these things. Birth, how about when a baby's coming? Right? We give a shower to the new mother, and And she decorates the nursery in all the right colors and textures and makes a warm, soothing environment. Well, isn't the end of life yet another important milestone along the way? And wouldn't it be nice to give the same consideration to things like environment and lighting and music, and really incorporate what people want? Would you want prayers and candles? Or would you rather have, laughter and family members visiting and a celebration? People have different beliefs and want different things along the way. What's important is to have that conversation and discuss what those things are. Additionally, deciding what's most important, or having conversations about what's most important. Is it more important for your loved one who has dementia to live as long as humanly possible? Or is it more important to live as long as nature allows, but to be comfortable during that time and allow nature to take its course as long as I can be comfortable and have my pain controlled? Same thing goes for artificial nutrition and hydration. That's a hot topic sometimes, especially in dementia care, because sometimes as the disease progresses, the person will have less of an appetite, will start losing weight, will not be eating well at all, and the discussion will sometimes come up, should there be artificial nutrition and hydration? Artificial nutrition is usually surgically placing a feeding tube through the abdomen into the stomach or into the small intestine and feeding by way of a formula that goes through the tube. It's associated with a lot of complications, including having that formula back up into the lungs, can cause pneumonia, infections, all those kinds of things. And there's no pleasure from eating either. There's no socialization, there's no enjoyment of food, and research shows it doesn't really make you live any longer. So is that something that would be important in determining how we want to plan ahead? Same goes with CPR. For all of us, our hearts will eventually stop. It doesn't necessarily mean that we should all have our chests pounded on and have air forced into our lungs, and not everybody is able to be resuscitated. And in fact, very few people, a very small percentage of people are successfully resuscitated. And so those are conversations to have before a crisis begins, and will help you to find a little bit of balance along the way, because that's, once you've named it, once you've defined it, once you've had some of those conversations, it makes it that much easier to move forward, because you know that you've made those plans and accounted to include your loved one who has dementia, their wishes. So as the disease progresses and as time marches on, there's some milestones along the way that might mark sort of the progression for you. And one of them is a change in personality. And so that might signify for you that the disease is progressing. I'm noticing that my loved one's personality is different. She's lost her sense of humor, or he's lost his witty responses, or he doesn't have that twinkle in his eye anymore. And so that's one thing that you may notice along the way. Someone who has been able to handle their finances previously, maybe they're the one who managed the money in the household, maybe they're no longer able to do that. That requires some executive reasoning and functioning in the brain, and some of those things are lost early on. It might be that they've had their first angry or emotional outburst that you've had to deal with, and that may mark the passage of time and the progression of the disease for you. The first episode of getting lost or wandering away. That's a tough one. Joanne mentioned the taking away driving privileges, or deciding it's time, or how much longer are we going to allow, or who's going to tell him, or can I get the doctor to tell him, or do we just hide the keys, but then he'll go insane looking for the keys and be very upset with us that he can't find the keys. Loss of physical function and mobility is another tough one. He can no longer get up off the couch on his own. I have to help him. Or he had his first episode of incontinence. He lost control of his bladder. I never expected to have to change my father, my husband, my mother. Okay, those are milestones that are really noteworthy along the passage, and may add to the burden of the caregiver, and may contribute to getting off balance a little bit. As the caregiver, you may begin feeling frustrated that your loved one who has dementia has difficulty with simple, basic things. You might feel as though you've got to take on more responsibility, you've got to take over tasks normally handled, by your loved one, be it the shopping, the checkbook, whatever it might have been. You may get angry, whether it's directly at him or her, or whether it's at the situation, or whether it's at the universe. But you may find that you're getting more and more angry, or impatient, or worried, or fearful. You may also feel overwhelmed with all the changes, what the future may hold, how to keep everything all together, how much you'll be able to handle as a direct caregiver, perhaps. What if he becomes violent? What if he wanders off at night? Okay, these are all thoughts and feelings that are so common and can be very overwhelming as the caregiver. Remember that your loved one who has dementia may also be feeling more and more confused. They have a harder and harder time making sense of the world around them. Processing the words, the thoughts, the sounds, the interactions, the lights, all of the stimuli that they have. And yet they may still be plenty aware enough that they're embarrassed when they cannot find the right word, or when they say the wrong thing, or when they can't finish something because they're not even sure what they're supposed to be doing any longer. They too may become angry, and that will often be exacerbated by some suspicious thoughts, being paranoid, being resistant to anything, everything, whether it's care, food, moving from here to there. And they may also get an idea in their head that they become adamant about, that they just can't get out of their head, something like, I have to leave, I have to go to work. Okay? And they're persistent with that thought. They're adamant and they will not let it go. So are you unbalanced now? Well, if you find that you're becoming very short-tempered, if you are extremely frustrated and very critical, you're slamming things, you're scolding the person with dementia, you're taking things away abruptly, you're doing it yourself, okay, you might be becoming a little bit unbalanced with all of these stresses placed on you, and that's a very common response. If you continue to deny the disease, you continue to deny the impact, or that things are progressing, or that things are getting worse, or that your loved one is not able to make certain decisions any longer, or not able to have certain functions like driving any longer, you're no longer leaving the house, you're not really seeing a lot of people, the isolation part that Joanne mentioned earlier, you're still embarrassed, you're hiding or covering for them if they're not able to do certain tasks, then you may be becoming unbalanced. And the risk with becoming so unbalanced is that you're not effective as a caregiver, and you may be contributing to some of the behavior problems and some of the other difficulties associated with disease progression simply by not being right with yourself just yet. So some ways to find balance. You know, remember that you can't change what's happening. It is what it is. You can only change how you react to it, how you handle it, how you will respond to it, and what tools you'll put in your toolbox to best be able to handle the various situations that come up. So think about ways that you and your loved one with dementia have always communicated. I mean, likely you're a caregiver because you're a family member, or you're a spouse, or have had a long association or affiliation with this individual. But if you've always been the nagging, angry wife, or if you have always been the annoyed daughter, or the overly critical husband, or the judgmental sibling, that relationship and that method of communication that the two of you have had forever and ever may not work any longer with the dementia in place and with the disease progressing forward, and with trying to maintain a positive environment that works for both of you. So some strategies that will help you communicate effectively were beautifully done in Joanne's handout, and she touched on them a little bit. Things like speaking slowly and calmly, and using simple words and phrases to communicate, using a gentle tone of voice, not snapping at the person, not barking out commands or orders at the person. Think about how you normally communicate, because you might find that without really meaning to, that you might have a scolding tone to your voice, or that you might bark out several orders in a row to eat this or drink that or wear this or put this on or stand up or sit down or those kinds of things. And you're maybe trying to be efficient, or you're maybe trying to be direct, but that emotion that comes with it, that tone of voice, is so important, so meaningful. And of course you want to speak loud enough to be heard, sound angry. And you also want to make sure that you get their attention and you speak directly to the person. If you're hollering from the kitchen to your loved one with dementia who's in the living room in front of the TV, you've just wasted a little bit of oxygen there, because that's not going to help communicate anything. He or she is not going to really get that. So rules to live by: keep it simple, keep it kind, and keep it focused on what you're trying to say to him or her. Allow your loved one who has dementia time to respond. Don't rush them. Be patient or flexible and understanding. Avoid interrupting them, because they may lose their train of thought at that point and not be able to complete what they're saying to you. But allow them to interrupt you, because they may have something on the tip of their brain that they want to get out to you, and if you don't allow them to interrupt, they may forget what they want to say to you. Pay attention to their body language and use that to gauge their understanding. And Joanne said this beautifully as well: how they feel is more important than the facts of the matter or what's going on in front of them. It's how they feel. And you get that feedback through their body language as well. Some additional tools that may be helpful as you try to find some balance along the way. One tool that I find very helpful was sort of a light bulb moment for me early in my nursing practice when I first learned about validation. And to be valid means to be true. And so when you validate or use validation with somebody who has dementia, it's really about living their truth. Okay, what is real for them at the moment or in the moment. And I always think of one patient that I cared for in particular, and her name was Stella. And she was a little spitfire of a thing. She had, she could be hysterically funny. She had this little twinkle in her eye that just, made you fall in love with her instantly. But she could also be a handful, and she would sometimes get verbally abusive, physically abusive to the staff. She would get the idea in her head, and she would not let it go. And if anyone tried to tell her that that idea was not true, or she did not need to leave, she would start pounding her fists, and she would get angry, and finally she would pinch anybody who was near her. She would, and so she became really challenging for our staff in the skilled nursing center to be able to deal with. And what would happen with her is that each afternoon around 2 or 3 o'clock, she would get the idea in her head. She had to leave, she had to go. And we asked her where she had to go to. And she had to go to the bus stop to pick up her children. Well, that's true for her. That's valid for her. Imagine, for all of you in the room who are parents, imagine your young children coming to the school bus stop and you can't make it there. Maybe that's happened to you. And so now you're worried about your children being cold and alone on the side of the road, maybe strangers, maybe danger from cars. And so that feeling in the pit of her stomach, that, oh my God, my children, was so real for her that just lit her on fire every afternoon. In talking to her family and getting to know more and more about her, we found out that Stella and her sister lived in the same town. And so they often shared child care duties. If one had to work or the other one couldn't pick up or had car troubles or whatever, today I'll pick up, tomorrow you pick up, I'll drop off, whatever. And so that was very helpful information to us, because what we were able to then do with Stella was validate her need to take care of her children. And we would say to her, oh yes, it's that time of day, isn't it? Yeah, the bus will be along in a little while. Oh, but today's Wednesday. Your sister, June, picks up the children on Wednesdays. Don't forget that. But we need to get ready for dinner because the kids are going to be hungry after they get home. And we would be able to validate her feeling that she has to get to her children. We'd be able to redirect her a little bit by sort of turning that into a new activity that still surrounding the children, carrying that thought about the children through. And then we were able to make that habilitative, which, again, Joanne has a nice piece in her handout on habilitation, creating that positive emotion and then having that continue throughout the day. So as we started talking about her children and getting ready for supper for the children, we would then ask her about what her children like to eat. Were her children picky eaters? How many children do you have anyway? What are their ages? And the more she got to talk about her children, boy, oh boy, did she light up. telling us all about each one's idiosyncrasies and activities, and he won't eat broccoli, he won't eat anything green. And the more we got to engage with her, the more that we were able to validate her and create a habilitated environment for her. So it means that you have to be a little bit creative. It means that you have to use some good communication techniques, and I hope to be sharing some of those with you as we're going along today. What we tried not to do is use negative words. We tried not to say things like, no, Stella, you don't need to leave, or you can't leave. This is a locked dementia unit. You can't leave. We didn't say things like that. That would not have been helpful to Stella in that moment. But what we did try to do was treat her with dignity and treat her with respect and validate where she was coming from and then create a positive environment around that. In addition to those techniques, you can also find balance with all of the outside help and resources that you see represented here today. And one final thing that I think it will help to have you at least feel a sense of inner comfort is if you really address safeguards to bring yourself and your family peace of mind, and of course to keep your loved one who has dementia safe. And safeguards I'm talking about are things like if you are so worried that your loved one is going to wander out of the home, that you can't sleep at night because you're afraid they're going to go through the door when you're not conscious, then put some safeguards in place. Maybe a family member can assist you with installing a more prevent all sorts of natural disasters like fire and flood and drowning and all kinds of things that can become true realities when you're dealing with somebody who has Alzheimer's disease. And that includes falls and other daily challenges that you'll deal with along the way. You may be struggling with when you can take time for yourself because you're so worried about supervising and so worried about making sure that they are safe. When do you take your shower? When do you get to sleep? When do you get to get food to keep in the refrigerator? Those are all things that we know that all of you are struggling with, and those are some things that you can ask for assistance with from family and friends and neighbors. I got busy talking to advance all of my slides. So are you unbalanced yet? Well, you might be feeling like this young lady up here, feeling a little overwhelmed, fearful. You may feel a little bit isolated, like there's no end in sight for all of this. Some of you may even feel like you're inadequate as a caregiver, that you're not doing enough. Certainly unprepared. You may be dealing with your own issues, things like your own health issues or family issues, maybe on your side of the family, or things that you're trying to deal with in addition. Joanne was raising 4 children, so she certainly had her own issues. And you may feel guilty that you have these other concerns or that you feel like you're not doing a good enough job. And so certainly it's not hard to imagine how you can really sort of get thrown for a loop with all of this. If you find, though, that you have symptoms of depression, if you find that you're losing weight, you're becoming extremely irritable, you're feeling despondent about things, or you have excessive anger or an inability to control your anger, then you really may be at risk of becoming burned out and really tipping the scales really in that unbalanced direction. Remember, there's no good preparation to do what you all are doing as direct caregivers of family members and close loved ones who have Alzheimer's disease. There's no course for that. There's no preparation for that. So, but doing everything that you can to learn about the disease, accessing all of the resources like you see here today, coming to a symposium like we have here today where you can learn about tips and techniques and stories and be able to network with other people who might be experiencing similar things will help you along the way to restore some of that balance. So let's talk about a few other specific techniques, giving the person with dementia chances to succeed. And I think that's really important. That creates that positive emotion, and that helps to make them feel good. It will make you feel good, and it will be a much more pleasant environment. So give them something that he or she can do, allow them enough time to do it, and prompt them to help them to be successful as needed along the way. And you will find that that will help their self-esteem, that will help them to feel good, that will help to maintain what abilities they do have. And again, that's a win-win. It's really important to focus on abilities. And sometimes you'll hear us refer to things like things the person can do, things the person will do, or things the person may do. Well, things the person can do are physically possible or cognitively possible given where they are at this point in their disease process. So even if it's that they can walk unsteadily, that's something they can do. And any ability they have, we want to work with, we want to try to maintain, and we want to try to look at it as an ability, not a disability that he can't walk well anymore, but it's an ability that he's still able to walk, even though it's unsteady walking. He's able to walk unsteadily. Will do are things that may interest or motivate your loved one who has Alzheimer's disease. So those things that interest him might have been prior things in life that they spent time with, dancing, singing, maybe religious activities, daily prayer, those kinds of things. They may be based on culture or habits or family traditions are things that they will do. And may do are things that are going to depend on how the sun, the moon, and the stars align on any given day. They may or they may not do those things. You have to just ask and see how it goes. Would you like to go outside and check on the garden today? Some days they may do that, and other days they may not do it. Okay. What we want to do is prevent excess disability. Excess disability is increased disability over and above what's already caused by the dementia, as though that weren't enough, right? Excess disability can be caused by things like an infection. Your loved one ends up with a bladder infection, and so now they're really not functioning at their usual level. Or maybe medication changes will cause excess disability. But there's one other thing that can cause excess disability as well, and that's you as the caregiver. As a caregiver, you can contribute to or cause excess disability if you're doing too much for your loved one who has Alzheimer's disease. You're not allowing them enough independence. You're not allowing them chances to succeed or focusing on their abilities. So you may be contributing to excess disability unknowingly if you're doing too much for them. Remember, it may be quicker for you to do it, it might be easier for you to do it, it might be cleaner if you do it and less hassle, but it doesn't necessarily make it better for you to be the one to do it. It may be better to allow your loved one who has Alzheimer's to do whatever that task or that activity is. Like Joanne talked about with the frying pan, the Teflon-coated pan. Okay? It would have been quicker, it would have been easier, it would have been cleaner if she had taken care of that pan herself. But she allowed him to do it, and he felt successful, and he maintained an ability along the way. So some other ways to find balance. Remember how important your communication is. I think we've touched on that a few times this morning. Speaking in short phrases, using simple words, and a pleasant tone. Remember not to ask questions that are not options. If your loved one is getting out of the shower and they're soaking wet and they are naked, do not ask them if they would like to get dressed next. In most households, that's not really an option. So instead, use a short, simple phrase like, it's time to get dressed. And then if you're able to offer an option, would you rather wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? That may allow them to have a little bit of choice in the matter and value their opinion along the way and have them be participating along the way. So be flexible along the way. If a nighttime shower has been the habit in the household for the last 10 years, that might not work going forward. Maybe nighttime is when they are sundowning, behaviors are escalating, and they're less able to function. So maybe a 10 a.m. shower or a 1 p.m. shower is going to be what works going forward. So be flexible with those time frames. And Joanne spoke a little bit and has some nice information in that purple handout also about the environment. Look around at your environment, everything from lighting to noises. Think about what the noises are. Just close your eyes at some point and listen to your household. If you have angry voices coming from the TV and those roundtable news shows where everybody interrupts each other and talks on top of each other, that's not a soothing sound. Mirrors are sometimes a problem for folks who have Alzheimer's disease. They are either startled by the stranger in the mirror, or they find the need to argue with the person in the mirror, or they recognize their mother or their father in the mirror. Okay, those can be problems and result in escalating behaviors. Nighttime, too. Look around your environment. Think about your environment if your loved one gets up. Is the bathroom light on? Is there a night light? Are there tripping hazards along the way? You might think it's a great idea to put the slippers next to the bed so that if he wakes up at night and needs to go to the bathroom, there's the slippers. But if he can't remember that he needs to put slippers on because he doesn't have good short-term memory, then the slippers are now just a tripping hazard next to the bed. Okay, so maybe a better solution is to put on those socks with the gripper bottoms so that whenever he gets out of bed, he's already got something on his feet. Okay, so look around your environment, think about the environment, and use that to give you a little peace of mind that things are as safe as they can be. You might also need to be creative around food and around intake. If your loved one won't sit down and eat a meal or stay focused on eating long enough, give them something on the go. Just make sure it's packed with as much nutritional value as possible. So instead of a plain cracker, make it a half a peanut butter sandwich. Or make it some peanut butter crackers, or put some cheese in there, or something that's got a little bit more nutritional value to it. A whole plate of food might be too overwhelming, but a little pile of cut up chicken might not be so overwhelming. You might be able to prompt your loved one by putting food on the spoon or the fork and then handing it to them. That's a little bit more of a natural reaction to do, is to then just put it to your mouth than to have to, cut up or load up or initiate the action. They don't have to initiate the action at that point. If you're trying to get him or her to drink more, try making a toast every now and again throughout the day. Here's to your good health. Let's each, clink our glasses and have a sip together. Again, make sure that it's not just, plain water is great, but if you're looking to increase nutrition, try it with giving them some Ensure shake or something similar. I had one patient along the way who loved to cook for her family. She loved to be in the kitchen. She loved to do all that kind of stuff. And so we would ask her to taste things for us all the time. High protein pudding is what we would ask her to taste. And we would sometimes give her more than one, and we would say, which one is better, the chocolate or the vanilla? Now we got 2 bites in. Okay, and we would ask her her opinion, and she would love to give us her, critical feedback on the quality of the food we were eating. Also think about what mealtime is like. If you are still sitting down to a meal, or you are trying to have a mealtime, what's it like? What's the environment like? Are there any familiar patterns you can build on from the past? Shows that were on around dinner time in their generation or their time frame that they're remembering, something like I Love Lucy or those kinds of shows you can get on DVD. You can tune into things like TV Land or MeTV and be able to pull those kinds of things out. We talked a little bit about safety and supervision already, and that's one of your largest concerns by and large, I'm sure, is how to maintain their safety and how to manage things like their wandering. We consider that an ability of exploring. Okay? And so when we focus on an ability of exploring, we might make it worth their while when they get to the end of the hallway that they keep going up and down in the house, all the way down to the bedrooms and back. Is there something there for them? Maybe you want to have a little basket of goodies, some photographs or some trinkets to play with that are safe for them to manipulate. Or if they always go down to one particular bedroom, put a basket of goodies down there that might keep them occupied. Fall prevention in the home is a real important thing to focus on because of significant injury that was made, say, after the year 2000. So, and if not, those are things that family members and neighbors and friends who keep saying, what can I do, or can I do something to help you? Those are things that you can ask for help with. What I really need is a new fire extinguisher. What I really need is one of those carbon monoxide things, because those can really help to keep your environment a little bit safer. And so time continues to march on. As we know, your disease will continue to progress, and care needs may continue to intensify. You may notice increased confusion, decreased communication, decreasing physical functioning and abilities, and it may get to a point where it's more than you as the caregiver can handle. So if as the caregiver you are completely overwhelmed, you are exhausted, you are afraid, you feel like a complete failure, or you feel totally desperate, as Julian said, you can't walk in the front door, then you are getting to that point where you're going to need some assistance beyond that. But remember, your loved one who has dementia is experiencing a lot of things too, and you may lose track of that a little bit because you're deep in the thick of things in terms of your emotions and the demands made on you and all that is going on from the caregiver perspective. But remember that your loved one with Alzheimer's is also very confused. They really cannot make sense of most things around them at this point. That is likely to make them anxious and fearful and bewildered, likely angry. And remember, they're oftentimes unable to communicate most of those feelings with any kind of words or with any kind of meaning. So if as the caregiver you're saying, I can't do this, whether it's I can't do this alone, or I can't do this at night, or I can't do this when he becomes violent, or when she won't eat, or when I don't get any help from my family. If it's taking a physical toll on you, your blood pressure is up, your weight is down, and you're finding a really hard time to really maintain your own health and wellness, or if you find yourself becoming unkind, or even to the point of being physically or verbally abusive, then really you're going to need to access some outside help and support. Also, if your loved one who has dementia is unable to be safe in the home, they're not eating, they're losing weight at a rapid pace, they have escalating behaviors, and they are an imminent risk of harm to themselves or to you or to someone else, then really you're at the point of needing to access some type of outside help and support. So if it's an urgent need or an urgent safety issue, you're talking the emergency room, and there may be a time when it comes to that. If it's less urgent, then it could be the physician's office that you're calling the doctor's office. He or she has had a change in condition, and worse than usual. Behaviors are escalating, not eating, and they may see you in the office together and may make an evaluation of where to go from there at that point. Again, if it's not as urgent, then you can access some of your other support resources, family members, friends, neighbors who might be able to provide some level of assistance. But I think what's important here, depending on what level of, regardless, I should say, of what level of assistance you need, is to plan ahead, knowing that this disease is progressive and knowing that situations can rise pretty quickly, to be able to have your physician phone number handy, to be able to have your family members' contact information. Do you have the work number? Do you have the cell number? Do you have the email address? Do you have all the ways of getting a hold of the people that you need to get a hold of? And do you have a current medication list? Medications are one of the first things they're going to ask you about in the emergency room or in the doctor's office. What are they currently taking? So make sure that you keep an up-to-date medication list and keep an emergency packet of information sort of ready to go. And that should include healthcare proxy or any other advanced directives like a comfort care or DNR order. Whatever you would have, make sure that you keep it together. Your options at that point, when you really get to the point where you need help, are going to be either inside the home or outside the home. And we have all of them, I think, represented here today, so I won't spend much time really discussing each of them. But there are plenty of options available. And if you need to make those types of arrangements, it is important to have that information. So fill your bags full of the pamphlets and brochures of the day to make sure that you really have the information that you need. So ultimately, how do you find your balance point? What is the balance between your needs as the caregiver and your loved one who has Alzheimer's disease, their care needs? What is the balance there? Well, certainly being the caregiver is a labor of love, right? It's a mission from your heart. But it is a very stressful job for which you've had little or no preparation whatsoever. And so it is very easy to lose your balance along the way. So to restore balance, try using some of the tips and techniques we've talked about today: communication, validation, habilitation, your resources of friends and families and neighbors and outside resources that can help support you, day programs and community support services, so that you can keep as balanced an approach as possible, because that's what's going to be the best for you as the caregiver, and we need you at your best, and it's going to be what's best for your loved one who has Alzheimer's disease. So thank you very much.